So, Avengers Endgame just received its 2-year anniversary a few days ago. Now, I know I'm late, and I decided to post my review of the film because I have very controversial opinions on this film. So, let's begin. Now, start talking about this film. As you can see, I'm clearly not a fan of Endgame. I think it's a pretty poor film. I feel like it really ruined the the logic of Endgame, what was meant to be. So let's begin. So let's begin with the first thing everybody talks about, and that is how well structured, how well filmed, and how well written it is. Well, first of all, a well written film is when the film is so unpredictable. This film is extremely unpredictable to the point where you actually get surprised when it happens. A great example is The Dark Knight. You know, when you ever think of The Dark Knight, you expect to have those in that interrogation scene that's really good, and in the other scenes, but it's sometimes so unpredictable that it honestly gets you. One example is the parade scene. Nobody really talks about this scene at all, which is sad because I think it was one of the most underrated scenes in film because it's one of the best scenes in the film. It just gets you off guard, and it's like, oh, I expected that to happen. And in the end, Batman actually loses. He didn't win, which is a great way to show how weak Batman truly is. However, when with a film like Endgame, here's the problem: is that okay? Here's the beginning. So the Avengers are gonna be doing nothing, or at least try to do something in the beginning. Then they're gonna do the time travel stuff, and then they're gonna fight Thanos, and of course Thanos would lose. That is literally the entire film. And guess what? When you actually end up watching it, all the things I just listed happen. So it really ruins your film when your film is so predictable. I think a great example would be Arrow Season 4, Episode 18. On Episode 9, everybody expected it to be Felicity in the grave scene. Then on Episode 18, it revealed it was actually Black Canary. That is a far more unshocking and more unpredictable way to go around. Now let's talk about another issue with Endgame is the whole time travel logic. It really makes no sense. This is like Flash Season 2, like time travel logic, where it's like, I don't understand this very well. So, for those who don't know, the Avengers went back in time to prevent several things that happened, and the thing is, we're not even sure the Avengers live with the Flash in the MCU. That is a huge middle finger to the comics. You see, in the comics, in both DC and Marvel, they have a thing called paradox. Maybe not in Marvel, but DC definitely. Where Marvel, you have villains like Kang the Conqueror who travel back in time and try to prevent several things, but the Avengers try to stop him. That's a much better way to go around. I think the thing is that in DC, is because they have a lot more continuity. They have a lot more reboots, which is a little harder to explain. But in my opinion, I feel like they should have done what the Flash did in season 3, where okay, so when you change the timeline, bad stuff could happen more in the future, which in my opinion is a far more interesting, more compelling way to show off human. In season 3, we saw more human to Barry Allen than we ever did, because Flashpoint, Barry saved his mother. Well, this affected Barry because he finally get to live with his parents that he didn't even live with in the normal timeline, and yet eventually he was able to, but he realized it was actually a pretty terrible decision. So he went back in time and changed it. That's what the Endgame should have had. None of this, oh, I'm gonna act comedy bullshit. That bullshit. Okay. The next positive I hear is about how nobody really expected Thanos. I expected him to. I didn't see a single trailer, and yet I knew he wasn't even gonna be that much. I feel like a big issue with Endgame, is this. Endgame has so much more issues. I think the thing is that I'm almost confident that even Diaz, as from Arrow, who is usually depicted in terms of power, one of like the weaker villains. Like, he's not as skilled as like Prometheus or Ra's al Ghul or even Damien Dark. I still believe he would take down the Avengers pretty fucking easy. Well, I should say damn easy. Don't know why I said it. He would take down the Avengers pretty damn easy. And when you have Cicada would destroy the Avengers. And then you have the Joker from the Nolanverse, who would easily just annihilate them. Not to mention, maybe even Scarecrow from the Nolanverse would even take them down. It's sad when characters like on that level can take down your team when it's supposed to be one of the most powerful teams ever. One of the biggest issues is the writing. The writing has always been a huge issue for the MCU because they just make no sense. I think the biggest example was when Iron Man and Captain America had that argument in the beginning. It's like, why are you just arguing? Like, shouldn't you be more focused on trying to take down Thanos? And it's like Iron Man is like so weak, and it's like he has to recover. So you could say, okay, when I recover, I could try to help you at the very least. That's actually showing some great character because okay, so you're gonna try, and actually, so when you recover, you're gonna try to help them. The better way to say it than just argue for no freaking reason. And I feel like one of the major issues with the MCU is their arguments. Like, when you watch that scene in episode 4 of season 4 of Arrow, where Oliver and Quinn had that argument, that's some great character development for both characters, because they had that one scene when Oliver just screams no, stop it as your daughter right now. They would be ashamed of what you're doing right now. That's some great development because Quentin was working with Damien Dark, and Oliver is telling him and saying how bad of a person Quentin actually is compared to Oliver, because even though Oliver is not the best person in the whole world, he's killed people, sure, he stabbed a guy's eye, yeah, but Quentin was working with a person who was planning on destroying the entire world, and Oliver was not. A better character and actually a better reason to argue than just, oh yeah, I'm just gonna argue with you for literally no reason. And the thing is, most of the arguments are meant to be comedy scenes, which in my opinion really ruins the characters. Let's talk about Thanos. I think Thanos has been the most overhyped villain and the most overrated one because Kevin Feige has stated that Thanos is still the most powerful villain the Avengers have ever faced. And no, that is honestly just like saying how, oh yeah, Stephen Amell's Green Arrow could definitely beat up Batman. That's like on that level in terms of stupidity. Because there's absolutely no way on hell that Thor could even defeat Thanos at all. In fact, like I said before, even Scarecrow could probably even take him down. It is just amazing at how even street level heroes didn't even felt city level threats. They felt like they're threats to the multiverse. Diaz and Agent Shields are great examples where they never necessarily felt threats to an entire city. They felt threats more to like the multiverse. I think another issue was how many of the same roster. Actually, you know what? This is going to be a review for both Endgame and Infinity War. So, I think a big issue for Endgame and Infinity War was how the original Avengers were still alive. It really showed terrible character development and terrible character arcs. Another issue with Endgame is how the Avengers literally did nothing for like 1 hour. It's like, this is boring. This is honestly even more boring than, say, Arrow Season 1, which was pretty boring for the most part. So overall, what would be my score? Overall, Endgame is not terrible, but it's not one of the best films ever. There's no way it is one of the best. So overall, 5 out of 10. I know, pretty bad score, but really, I think a C plus or C. I think a C minus is better for Endgame because it's really disappointing when you rewatch it and you see this video. You're gonna be, yeah, this is kind of disappointing in a lot of ways. Another thing, I hate how people constantly complain about the Lee and Yu explosion, where in the Avengers headquarters. Okay, so you're telling me you're gonna no, you can survive buildings drop upon you, and yet you're almost all of them were just humans. They're not gods. And this is alien technology, which is meant to be more impressive and more powerful than human technology. That is just the simplest bad writing ever. That's like an excuse to keep your main characters alive. On to Infinity War, another disappointing film. Now, Infinity War, I feel I had the similar problems just because not time travel. Like before, Thanos was way too overhyped. Everybody kept on overhyping Thanos to the point that, yeah, I don't even see. I'm pretty sure even Riddler from the comics is far more powerful than even Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. That's kind of sad. Infinity Gauntlet, and I feel like a big issue was that we never understood Thanos' motivation in Infinity War. Thanos, in my opinion, works better as being a person more in love with death, because the motivation he had in Infinity War is more like Ra's al Ghul's motivation in Batman Begins, where he just wanted to remove crime and corruption, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that he has bad methods of using it. Then we have the argument scene again. I feel like the problem with the arguments, they have to stop those arguments for the future MCU films because they're just becoming terrible. Terrible acting and terrible written. Now, I know they're saying the actor is pretty bad in the role is being kind of rude because it's just the right, but that is some really bad acting. That is not how... I understand that it's just writers, but sometimes in these films, it's clearly obvious it's the actors. And I think the arguments is a great example because honestly, who argues just for saving somebody? It was even proven when Iron Man said that to Doctor Strange, and I was like, okay, why are you guys arguing then? There's really no reason to argue. Maybe you can reach, okay, how much time do we have? That is a better reason to talk. Then we have Spider-Man, who's easily the worst character in the MCU. I know Tom Holland's a great person, but his Spider-Man is just bad. Straight up awful. I do not even like his character. His relationship with Tony Stark is just so annoying. Every time they have an argument, it's always about, okay, we're gonna have an argument scene. Okay, that's nice. I don't want to see any of this anymore. Yet we still get it until Endgame because when they realize, yeah, I think Spider-Man is the biggest insult to the comics because Spider-Man, you need to at least have Uncle Ben. Sure, maybe not have him with all the time, but at least show us flashbacks. Flashbacks would have been a great way. But oh yeah, but I forgot. Remember, this is the Disney, so let's not make the flashback too scary because this is more for family. And I'm like, you know, I'm just gonna watch Arrow season 4 because at least the flashback actually meant something. Honestly, Arrow season 4's flashbacks has actually more connections to the main plot than the entire MCU has alone. So, I think a great example would be the idol in the flashbacks. Damien Dark had the same idol. That's a great connection to the flashbacks. You see what I mean? By, okay, here's this and here's that. None of that makes sense here. Infinity War should have at least Spider-Man get at least some sort of flashbacks. Then we have the whole Avengers doing nothing part, which in my opinion is another middle finger. If you're a superhero, you do not just stand around, okay, I'm just gonna eat tacos because I know it's the end of the world. Everybody needs needs me, and it's like, no, I'm just gonna eat tacos because who cares? Let's just let that villain win, and let's just have an argument so that villain has a better chance. And honestly, the Avengers are technically responsible for the half of the universe's population being missing because they were staying around and doing nothing. And they thought, okay. Oliver Queen is dealing with Damien Dark. Okay. He's the end of the world. This is literally the same issue that season 4 of Arrow and season 2 of The Flash had. Where on Arrow, you actually mentioned Zoom many times, yet here, you barely mentioned Damien Dark. It's a similar problem. And no, crossovers do not count. It doesn't matter if that season is the worst season. You still have to at least acknowledge that they exist in the same universe. That's the same issue. In my opinion, the MCU is one of the worst things to ever happen. Because even when people don't like Olicity, at the very least, CW actually is a better network for superhero television and movies than Disney. Because comics have these they have these romantic and romance and drama elements. So you want to put in more in networks and that do stuff like that. Disney's not one of them. Disney's more for kids. And even when you watch Endgame, it's still more for kids. In my opinion, it really ruined the entire thing. Now, in my opinion, by far, I think a big issue was the Guardians of the Galaxy. They were just goofy around, and it's like, oh yeah, well look, we're so funny. I'm like, oh my god, why are they just fooling around, doing nothing? This is bad, just straight up bad. It really ruined the Guardians as characters because now they're also responsible for half the universe's population being missing. It is so disrespectful to the characters in the comics. Like when people talk about how, oh yeah, Olicity ruins Green Arrow. No. Watch the MCU and read comics. Olicity clearly doesn't ruin the show. It's just that it's not a good direction to focus on. Yet only a few episodes actually have some. What I mean by a few is only a few episodes actually just focus on the two of them. Rarely does an episode actually focus. Rarely does a season actually focus on them. And it's like, watch the MCU and actually read comics or do research. Notice how much more similar Arrow actually is compared to MCU. Even it doesn't matter if you kill off Black Canary. It's still Arrow has far greater and more similarities to the comics than the MCU does. And people actually don't like Arrow. A lot of people hate Arrow. I mean, people stopped watching at season 3 and season 4, season 6. Some of them even stopped watching in season 1, maybe even in season 2. People don't like Arrow. People sometimes consider it to be one of the worst superhero TV ever created. Anyways, let's go on back to the MCU. One of the biggest problems with the MCU is that, with Infinity War at least, is the fact that they never actually established. And the thing is, like Endgame, it was way too predictable. Oh yeah, we knew Thanos is literally going to win, because why would there be a part 2 if there was nothing? And then, a part 2, and then part 1, it's like, okay, how in the world are people even surprised by this? It's like, okay, you're just drinking, eating beer, and thought, okay, there's just one part, just one Avengers and Infinity War film, and then the sequel is not happening. Okay. Oh, it surprised me that, oh yeah, Spider-Man died. That surprised me, that's shocking. And oh yeah, it's surprising that Thanos won. I'm like, no, this is not surprising. This was predictable. I predicted this from the very get-go. It was announced, okay, the main villain of Avengers 3, because there's 2 parts, would easily win. Then it happened. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not even surprised by this. And then you have no Hulk. disrespectful to the character. Yes, Hogan may not have and it was just played for comedy. And another thing, Hogan the other film was portrayed awful. Then you have Thor, biggest middle finger to Thor ever. Thor is like one of my favorite Marvel characters. Actually, he's actually my favorite Marvel character. And the fact that he was so disrespected shows how lazy they were. They were too afraid to make Thor so dark because in the comics, he's honestly on par with Batman as one of my favorite characters. That's right, you just heard me say that Thor is my favorite Marvel character, and he's on par with the Dark Knight himself. I love his rogues area. I love everything about Thor. I think he's a really cool character. I would love to see a crossover between him and Batman one day. But Thor in the comics has usually been portrayed as like a war character, and he actually is a very serious character. Yes, maybe at times he might be a little naive, but that's nothing compared to MCU Avengers, who's basically now like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna act like a comedian. I know Chris Hemsworth's funny, but when you're acting more like him, it really sometimes gets on your nerve because you want him more comic book accuracy. Honestly, Diaz was so much closer to the comics compared to this. Even Ra's al Ghul on Arrow, who is usually depicted as one of the worst villains on Arrow, actually felt closer to the comics than Thor does. So overall, my thoughts, 5 out of 10 or a C minus. So overall, the MCU really needs to stop. I think WandaVision sucks. I might actually do a review on it, saying why it sucks. Falcon Winter Soldier, not interested in it at all, and I might actually do a review for every MCU film. So stay tuned. So anyways, I'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.